Daniel Martinez had been told by his older brother that $30,000 in savings at age 32 was cute, almost adorable, the financial equivalent of a child's lemonade, stand something to be patronized rather than respected. But what his brother Ryan didn't know, couldn't know because Daniel had carefully ensured he wouldn't, was that the modest savings account was merely the visible tip of a portfolio that had quietly grown to just over $300 million. What would you do if your own family mocked your success without knowing the whole truth? The brothers had grown up in Phoenix in a household where money was discussed constantly but never quite achieved, where their father had worked in middle management and their mother had stretched every dollar until it screamed. Ryan had been the golden child, charismatic, confident, the kind of person who walked into rooms and immediately became their center. He had gone to Arizona State on a partial scholarship, majored in business, graduated with decent grades and better connections, and landed a job at a commercial real estate firm where his personality compensated for what he lacked in genuine insight. By 35, he was pulling in $200,000 a year, driving a leased BMW, living in a Scottsdale condo with mountain views, and posting about it all constantly on social media with the hunger of someone who needed witnesses to believe in his success. Daniel had been different from the beginning, quieter, more internal, the kind of child who took apart computers to understand how they worked and read programming manuals for entertainment. Where Ryan had collected friends, Daniel had collected knowledge. Where Ryan had networked, Daniel had studied. He had gone to the University of Arizona, majored in computer science and mathematics, and spent his college years not at parties but in the library and computer labs, building skills that seemed arcane to his family but were becoming increasingly valuable in an economy that was digitizing faster than anyone quite realized. After graduation, Daniel had taken a job at a tech startup in Tempe, making $45,000 a year, less than Ryan was making in real estate even then, a fact that Ryan had mentioned at every family gathering with the casual cruelty of someone who believed he was simply stating obvious truths. Different paths for different talents, Ryan would say, clapping Daniel on the shoulder with the patronizing affection of someone secure in his superiority. Not everyone can handle the pressure of commission-based work. There's no shame in a steady paycheck. And Daniel would smile and nod and say nothing, because he had learned early that Ryan needed to win these exchanges, needed to establish hierarchy, and fighting him on it only made family dinners more exhausting. But Daniel had negotiated something in that first job that Ryan hadn't understood and their parents couldn't evaluate equity. He had taken a lower salary in exchange for 2% of the company, a bet that his work would help make the company valuable, that his code and architecture and problem-solving would translate into something more durable than a paycheck. The startup had been acquired 3 years later by a larger firm for $80 million, and Daniel's 2% had become $1.6 million overnight. He was 25 years old, and suddenly he had wealth that exceeded everything his parents had accumulated in their entire lives. He told no one. Not his parents, not his friends, not the woman he was dating. Certainly not Ryan. He put the money into investments index funds, mostly boring and diversified. The kind of portfolio that finance bros like Ryan would have mocked as unsophisticated but that grew steadily, reliably, compounding year after year. He kept his small apartment, his used Honda Civic, his wardrobe of t-shirts and jeans. He took another tech job, this time with a salary of $70,000 and another equity package, and did it again, built something valuable, waited for the acquisition, watched his holdings grow. The second exit brought him $8 million. The third brought him $23 million. By the time he was 30, Daniel had accumulated just over $40 million in liquid assets, and he was living in a $1,500 a month apartment and driving a car that Ryan loudly pitied. At family Christmas that year, Ryan had announced his own success. He had closed a major deal, earned a 6-figure commission, bought the BMW. Their parents had beamed with pride, had toasted his achievement, had held him up as evidence that hard work and people skills mattered more than book learning. Daniel had congratulated him sincerely, because the money was real and the achievement was real, even if it was small compared to what Daniel had quietly accumulated. "What about you, Danny?" their mother had asked, using the childhood nickname he had long outgrown. "How's the computer stuff going?" There was affection in her voice, but also a faint dismissiveness, the tone of someone asking a hobby question rather than a career question. It's good, Daniel had said, cutting his ham into precise pieces. Steady. I'm working on some interesting problems. He didn't mention that he was a senior architect at his current company, that he was building systems that processed millions of transactions a day, that his equity package was worth another $12 million on paper and growing. Ryan had laughed, warm and condescending. Steady. That's Danny for you. Mr. Reliable. He had said it fondly, as if reliability was a consolation prize for not having Ryan's spark, Ryan's hustle, Ryan's winner's instinct. The pattern had continued for years. Ryan's life was loud and visible, the new condo, the engagement to a woman who posted carefully curated photos of their life, the wedding at an expensive resort, the promotion to senior vice president, the lease on a Porsche. Daniel's life was quiet and invisible. The same modest apartment, the same old car, the same unassuming presence at family gatherings. But behind that quiet facade, the wealth was growing exponentially. He had joined another startup at 30, this one in artificial intelligence, and his equity package had been substantial because by then he had a reputation, a track record, the kind of resume that made founders eager to bring him on. That company had gone public when Daniel was 31, and his shares had been worth $78 million at IPO. With his previous holdings, he had crossed $100 million in net worth, and he was living in the same apartment, eating the same modest meals, driving the same car. He had started working with a wealth management firm by then. You couldn't manage that kind of money yourself without it becoming a full-time job, and they had diversified his holdings across equities, bonds, real estate, and alternative investments. The portfolio had grown to $250 million by his 32nd birthday, and he had finally moved out of the apartment, not into something flashy, but into a modest house in a nice neighborhood, nothing that would raise questions. The family gathering where it all came to a head was their father's 65th birthday, held at Ryan's condo because Ryan had insisted he wanted to show off the new furniture, the new espresso machine, the view he never tired of mentioning. Daniel had arrived in his Honda, now 12 years old and showing its age, and Ryan had greeted him at the door with the usual affectionate superiority. Jesus, Danny, that car is older than some of my employees. You know you can afford something better, right? Even on a tech salary, you should be able to swing a decent lease. It runs fine, Daniel had said mildly, handing over the bottle of wine. He had brought a nice bottle, though not so nice that it would prompt questions about how much he had spent. The evening had progressed in the familiar rhythm of family events, their mother asking questions about Ryan's latest deal, their father grilling steaks on Ryan's balcony grill, Ryan's wife showing off photos from their recent vacation to Maui. Daniel had sat on the leather sectional that Ryan had mentioned, cost $8,000, sipping wine, listening, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed. The moment that changed everything had started innocuously. Their mother had been talking about retirement, about the modest nest egg she and their father had built, about their plans to travel a bit, maybe get a small RV. We're not rich, she had said, but we've been careful. We should have enough to be comfortable. You did great, Mom, Ryan had said, his arm around his wife. You taught us to be smart with money. Well, you taught me, at least. He had grinned at Daniel, the comment framed as a joke but carrying the usual edge. Danny's still in the accumulation phase, living like a college student to build up that nest egg. I do okay, Daniel had said, because it was easier than correcting him, easier than explaining. But Ryan hadn't let it drop, had been in one of those moods where he needed to perform, needed to demonstrate his wisdom and success. Seriously though, Danny, you've got to start thinking about enjoying life. You can't just hoard money forever. I mean, what do you even have in savings at this point? 30 grand? 40? He had said it with genuine curiosity, mixed with the assumption that whatever number Daniel offered would be small enough to require advice, guidance, the benefit of Ryan's superior understanding of finance and success. The room had gone quiet, everyone suddenly aware that Ryan had crossed some line of propriety, that asking about someone's specific financial situation was gauche even among family. Their mother had made a small sound of disapproval. Their father had focused intently on his steak, but Ryan had continued, oblivious or uncaring. riding the momentum of his own performance. Come on, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to help. You're 32. You're still renting. You're driving a car that should have been retired years ago. If you've managed to save 30 or 40,000, that's actually impressive on a tech salary. But you need to start making that money work for you. I can introduce you to my financial advisor, get you into some real investments. Daniel had set his wine glass down on the coffee table, the base making a soft sound against the wood. He had lived with this dynamic for so long that it had become almost comfortable, a familiar weight. But something in that moment, maybe the condescension, maybe the public nature of the humiliation, maybe just the accumulated fatigue of years of playing small had shifted. I appreciate the offer, Ryan, he had said quietly, but I'm okay on the investment front. Ryan had laughed, warm and dismissive. Danny, I love you, but parking money in a savings account isn't investing. You need diversity. You need growth. You need someone who understands how wealth actually works. I have diversity, Daniel had said, still in that same quiet voice. And growth. The portfolio's doing pretty well, actually. Ryan's expression had shifted to patient condescension, the look of someone preparing to educate. Okay, walk me through it. What's your asset allocation? What percentage are you in equities versus bonds? What's your risk tolerance assessment? He had used the terms proudly, demonstrating his financial literacy, his superiority in this domain. And Daniel had made a decision in that moment, had felt something settle in his chest, had understood with sudden clarity that he was done playing this game, done allowing Ryan's need to feel superior to dictate how he presented himself. I'm about 75% equities, 20% bonds, 5% alternatives including some private equity and real estate holdings. My wealth manager rebalances quarterly based on market conditions and tax optimization. Current portfolio value is approximately $312 million, give or take a few million depending on how tech stocks are doing on any given day. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of contemplation or processing, but the silence of complete cognitive disruption, of minds encountering information so contradictory to their existing frameworks that they simply stopped functioning. Ryan's face had gone blank, his mouth slightly open, his eyes fixed on Daniel with an expression of such complete incomprehension that it would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. What? It was their mother who spoke first, the word barely a whisper, her hand moving to her throat in that gesture of shock that Daniel had seen in movies, but never witnessed in real life. Daniel had felt strangely calm, the way people describe feeling calm in emergencies, as if some part of his brain had taken over that was capable of functioning while the rest of him processed what he had just done. $312 million. Last time I checked. Well, that was last week's statement. Could be more now, could be less. The market's been volatile. Ryan had laughed, a sharp barking sound with no humor in it. That's not possible. You work in tech. You make what, 90,000 a year? 100? There's no way you... He had stopped, his mind clearly trying to run calculations that wouldn't resolve, trying to find the angle, the explanation that would restore his understanding of reality. I make 140,000 in salary, Daniel had said, still in that unnaturally calm voice. But I've been taking equity packages for the past decade. I was at NextGen when they got acquired by Oracle. That was my first big exit. Then I was at CloudStruct when they went public. Then DataMind when they got bought by Google. And now I'm at Argos AI, which is about to go public, and that'll probably add another 100 million or so to the portfolio, maybe more depending on valuation. He had recited it like a grocery list, each company name landing like a small bomb in the stunned silence of the room. Their father had set down his fork, the metal clinking against the plate. Son, are you saying you're worth $300 million? His voice had carried disbelief, but also a dawning realization, a recalculation of every interaction they had ever had, every assumption he had made about his younger son's life and choices. Give or take, Daniel had confirmed. I stopped tracking it obsessively once it crossed 100 million. At a certain point, the number stops meaning much. It's just compound growth doing what compound growth does. He had looked at Ryan, who was sitting frozen, his arm still around his wife but his entire body rigid with shock. So I appreciate the offer to introduce me to your financial advisor, Ryan, but I'm pretty happy with the firm I'm using. They specialize in high net worth individuals. Minimum portfolio size is 25 million. They've been good at tax optimization and risk management. Ryan's wife had pulled out her phone, her fingers moving rapidly, and Daniel had known she was searching for the companies he had mentioned, finding the acquisition prices, the IPO valuations, calculating whether his story was possible. Her face had confirmed what she was finding before she spoke. Datamind sold to Google for $3.2 billion last year, she had said quietly, her eyes wide. If you had even 1%. I had 3%, Daniel had said. I was one of the first 10 employees. I built most of their core architecture. He had said it simply, without pride or false modesty, just stating a fact. The room had erupted then, not in anger but in a chaos of questions and exclamations and demands for explanation. Their mother had wanted to know why he had never told them, her voice rising with something between hurt and confusion. Their father had wanted to know if he was safe, if people knew, if he had security. Ryan had said nothing, had sat frozen on his expensive couch in his expensive condo, his face cycling through emotions too rapidly to track shock and disbelief and embarrassment and something that might have been anger or might have been grief. Daniel had answered the questions patiently. He had kept it quiet because he didn't want it to change his relationships, didn't want people treating him differently, didn't want to become a target or a solution to other people's problems. He had kept living modestly because he genuinely didn't need much, because he had grown up understanding that money was for security and freedom rather than display, because he found his satisfaction in the work itself rather than in the symbols of success. Yes, he was safe. Yes, he had appropriate legal structures. Yes, he was being careful. But through it all, he had kept watching Ryan, had seen his brother processing the revelation, had watched the careful architecture of their relationship crack and reform. Ryan had built his entire identity around being the successful one, the winner, the brother who had figured out how life worked. And in one conversation, that entire structure had been revealed as fiction, or at least as radically incomplete. Daniel wasn't the struggling younger brother who needed guidance. He wasn't the reliable but unexceptional sibling content with a modest life. He was wealthier than Ryan would ever be, had been wealthier for years, and had hidden it with such perfect execution that Ryan had never suspected, had continued to offer condescending advice about savings and investments to someone who could have bought Ryan's entire life with what his portfolio earned in interest every month. Ryan had finally found his voice as the evening was winding down, as their parents were preparing to leave, as the reality of the situation had settled into something that resembled acceptance. "Why didn't you tell me?" he had asked. And for the first time Daniel could remember, his brother's voice had carried no superiority, no performance, just genuine hurt confusion. Daniel had considered the question carefully before answering, had thought about all the moments of casual dismissal, all the assumptions Ryan had made, all the times he had positioned himself as the successful one who needed to guide his less capable younger brother. "Because you never asked," he had said finally. "You told me about your life, your successes, your achievements, and I was genuinely happy for you, but you never asked about mine, not really. You asked questions that assumed my answers would be small, would need your advice, would confirm your understanding of who I was, and I let you believe it because it was easier than dealing with how you would react to the truth." The words had landed with visible impact, and Ryan had nodded slowly, his face showing something that might have been the beginning of self-awareness. "I was an asshole," he had said quietly. "All those comments about your car, your apartment, your tiny savings. Jesus Christ, Danny, I was such an asshole." "You were proud of your success?" Daniel had said, and it was true, or at least part of the truth. "There's nothing wrong with that. But you needed me to be less successful to feel good about your own achievements, and I enabled that by hiding mine." The aftermath had been complicated in the way family things are always complicated. Ryan had gone through a period of visible adjustment, had stopped posting quite so frequently on social media, had seemed to question things he had previously accepted as absolute truths. Their relationship had changed, had become less easy but perhaps more honest, had required both of them to navigate a dynamic that didn't have the clear hierarchy that had structured their interactions for decades. Their parents had worried about the money, had offered advice Daniel didn't need, had slowly come to accept that their quiet, younger son had achieved something extraordinary while living in a way that looked utterly ordinary. Daniel had eventually bought a nicer car, not a Porsche or a BMW, but a comfortable Tesla that suited his actual needs rather than making a statement. He had started donating more visibly, had established a foundation focused on STEM education for underprivileged kids, had allowed his success to become slightly less invisible. But he had kept the modest house, had kept the t-shirts and jeans, had kept the core of who he was intact despite the revelation of what he had accumulated. Perhaps revenge is not always about dramatic confrontations or devastating public humiliations. Sometimes it is quieter, more patient, the careful accumulation of success in silence followed by the precise moment of revelation that forces someone to confront their own assumptions and biases. Ryan had mocked Daniel's tiny savings with the casual cruelty of someone certain of his own superiority, and Daniel had responded not with anger or defensiveness, but with years of quiet work that built something so undeniable that even Ryan's considerable capacity for rationalization couldn't diminish it. The truth about family dynamics, about the roles we assign each other and the stories we tell ourselves, is that they are more fragile than we believe. Ryan had needed to be the successful brother, had built his identity around that role, and Daniel had allowed him that illusion for years. But illusions cannot survive contact with reality forever, and when the truth finally emerged, not dramatically but simply, stated in calm, measured tones over birthday steaks, the entire architecture of their relationship had to be rebuilt from materials that acknowledged what was actually true rather than what was comfortable to believe. And out there, in living rooms and family gatherings and quiet moments of private achievement, countless others are accumulating their own truths, building their own portfolios of success that contradict the roles their families have assigned them. Those revelations are coming, patient and inevitable, for everyone who has been underestimated, dismissed, or relegated to a supporting role in someone else's narrative of superiority. The moments when the quiet sibling turns out to be extraordinary. When the overlooked child turns out to be the one who understood how the game was really played. When the tiny savings turn out to be $300 million and counting.